Good afternoon. In this video, I want to briefly look at a comment I received on the issue of the Civil War and Robert Breaker, and just to show the utter ignorance and stupidity of these guys and the neo-confederate mindset. I've seen you watching my videos or watching through. I discussed the idea why the Confederates didn't want blacks imported in their Confederate Constitution. I discussed all that because they had excessive number. They had 3 million of them. They didn't need any more. It wasn't some great moral, and the 1808 in the American Constitution was a compromise at that time with the blacks. But there was a cutoff. But that was a compromise with the South. The North wanted them all cut off right away, but the South still wanted more to come in. Now, when the Constitution came out in 1860. They already had enough blacks. That's why they wanted to expand the territories. Any more new blacks coming in would have lessened the value of the blacks they had. So that's why he's making a big deal. Read article, who's real evil here? Read the article, section 9.1. The importation of Negroes of the African race from any foreign country other than slaveholding states or territories in the United States of America is hereby forbidden. The Congress is required to pass such laws as shall effectively prevent the same. Yeah, and you want the importation. They had 3 million of them already. They didn't need any more. The American Constitution. The migration or importation of such persons. They didn't say Negroes of the African race. Notice that, people. Notice how the Americans phrased it in the American Constitution. They didn't call them Negroes. They called them persons. The importation of such persons of any states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for such each person. Not Negro. Notice the difference, people. So let me show you some more questions this guy has. These are the nuts that you deal with. The guy's contending for the faith. Why don't you read it? Read that. And I dealt with it. He acts like I haven't dealt with it. I dealt with the issue of why the South didn't allow importation of blacks in 1860 in the Confederacy. They advocated for it in 17 during the Constitution of 1783. By 1860, they had plenty of blacks. They had 3 million of them. They didn't need any more. Tell everybody what it says. It seems like you're the one guilty of omission. Read the Confederate Constitution, by the way. And read the Confederate Constitution. I told you what it says. And you notice they say Negro in there. They don't put the word Negro in the American Constitution. If slavery was the reason for civil war, I did the despot. Lincoln waited nearly 3 years to emancipate slaves. He didn't think he had a right to do so. The emancipation of slaves was a war issue, and he had a problem on his hand because as they were going into Southern Territory and liberating these slaves, the generals who only wanted to preserve the Union were sending slaves back to the masters. But Lincoln had a problem. Lincoln had a problem with slavery because he had to keep the border states, like Kentucky, which were slave owners. See, these people are very simplistic. Very simplistic, very stupid people. Lincoln had to make compromises in order to keep these border states intact because he tried a compensation to the border states. He said, well, the federal government will buy your slaves and to free them. And they refused to give them up. And Lincoln was telling them, look, slavery is going to end. You might as well get some money. No, they wouldn't do it. So, why did he only free them in the South? Because of the border issue. Because slavery was constitutional. Stupid. If you read something, you'd figure it out, except your neo-confederate propaganda. And he put the Emancipation Proclamation in because he didn't want the slaves being sent back into Southern territory to be used again by the Confederates. That's what they were using the blacks at that point, to build fortifications and to be involved in a lot of issues to help their military. And he says, well, we're going to take that away from them. We're going to keep these guys with us. And they used those guys for the Union. You know, of course they would pay them, but the fact that, you know, something at least, but they pay, you know, they won't consider slaves. So why does he only free them in the South? Because the border state issue is stupid. Look it up. What exactly makes you think you're a historian? I got my master's degree in history. Yeah. What makes you think you're an expert on anything in the world? I'm not saying I'm an expert in anything, everything on the world, but I know some things. I know some things, and I see guys like Robert Baker talking that those guys don't know anything. Like this guy, contending faith, he doesn't know anything. He's a moron. How do you defend a president that will turn the full weight of the U.S. military loose on his own people? Don't break the law. Don't break the law. Simple as that. If you break the law, the federal government's going to come after you. And the fact is, what do you think of a group of states that would hold people, 3 million people enslaved? What do you think about that? How do you defend a president that turns a guy like Sherman loose on the South? Sherman was pro-Southern. Read your history. Contending for the faith. Read your history. He turned him loose on the South because he wanted the South to recognize this war has to end. But he was pro-Southern, and they were people in the North. The people in the North were very concerned with Sherman because he did not believe in their freeing the slaves, and he did not. He wanted to make a very soft peace with the Confederates. So he was not allowed to make any separate peace with the Confederates. He made an armistice, I think it was with General Johnson, and the Washington said no, that was too easy. No, you know. So Sherman was a pro-Southern guy. A lot of guys in the Union Army were. The guy you wanted just to preserve the Union, the guy you said wanted, he did just want to preserve the Union. He didn't want to free the slaves. I'm sorry if you never read history and read about Sherman. But Sherman was a very pro-Southern. Give me a break. You have no idea what you're talking about. Well, you better read about Sherman. You just stick with Slutter, and then you're kind of making me sick with your lies and omission of critical facts, Ed. So that's what you get with these idiots. That's what you get. And their stupidity and their lies. Anybody looks at Sherman knows was one of the post-Southern generals in the Union Army. Yeah, he tore Georgia up. He says, I'll make them howl. Because he had to end the war. He said, this war is dragging on, we got to end it. And the way to end it is to go in to the South and let them see what the results of war is. And the fact of the matter is that he kept the Union soldiers very much in control. They were not allowed to harm the civilians, so that's all myth, the raping and all that. That's myth. But he tore them up. He tore them up in order to say, that's where you get this expression, war is hell. So, and you know who blew up Atlanta? It wasn't Sherman. It was the Confederates. When they were retreating, they blew the city up. It wasn't Sherman. But Sherman was cut off from the supply lines, so he was going to live off the land. In fact, Grant was very concerned because he didn't hear from Sherman for quite a long time. Because he cut off his own supply lines and said, we're going to go in this back way and tear up the South. Make them feel the wrath. But how do you feel about a group of people who want to keep 3 million people in slaves and chains? Oh, that's okay. This guy doesn't know anything in history. Just like all these neo-confederates. Totally ignorant. And when the Confederates wanted to rearm the South, wanted to arm the blacks, they had a big problem. Breaker saying half the Confederate Army was Southern. I mean, black. He ain't got what he's talking about. They didn't get into the very end of the war. And remember article, African Negroes. You know, it made the point. And I've read it right through the Constitution. Every time these guys point out Negro slavery. But, and by the way, Jefferson Davis wanted to continue the fighting with guerrilla warfare, no matter how destructive that would have been to the South. Robert E. Lee and the other generals said, no, when this war's over. And that's what the majority, they want to rebuild. They want to, you know, they said, look, we lost, we're going to move on. But guys like Jefferson Davis, they want to just, you know, go, want the armies to disband, have guerrilla fighting, continue war forever. But this is the Confederate nation.
Hello, please leave a message after the tone.
Page 291, he says when he brought up the emancipation issue about blacks fighting for the Confederacy. Let's see here. I can find that. Let me see. Find it here. Okay, page 290. When Jefferson Davis opened the final session of the Confederate Congress on November 7, 1864, his message contained much that the members expected to hear. He made the best of the military situation and asked for more troops. As anticipated, he asked for revisions in the tax law, and remedies to the inflationary spiral in Confederate money. That's where we get the word like not worth a Confederate, or not worth a Continental. Both systems, they just were printing money, destroyed the value of it. Yet to his Congress, the president offered one program which took it by surprise, and with good reason. Davis proposed nothing less radical than a limited form of emancipation for Southern blacks. The president prefaced his proposal with the observation that congressional authorization to employ slaves in non-combatant military services had been less successful than anticipated. Rather than tinker with the act to try to improve it, Davis now suggested a radical modification in the theory of law. The president pointed out that slaves viewed merely as property were and had been subject to impressment for long periods of labor in the construction of field fortification. That was a justification for using field fortification. They were considered property. Then he went to the core of the argument. The slave, he said, bears another relation to the state, that of a person. Now they're going to try to say, well, he's also a person. That's where you get the 3/5 rule. What the Confederacy now needed, Davis contended, was the service of the slave as person. The military duties, although non-combatant, required instruction and extended terms of service. Because of the hazards involved, those duties also demand loyalty and zeal. Thus, the president concluded the relation of person predominates. Could no longer seem as a property. And the same thing in the North. Once you put a gun, and that's what the blacks recognize, that's what they want to serve. Once you put a gun in a man's hands and put a uniform on him, you've got to look at him as an equal. Because he's fighting for his own freedom. Thus, the president concluded the relation of person predominates, and it would seem proper to acquire for the public service the entire property of the slave, and to pay thereof due compensation rather than to impress his labor for short terms. The government's going to pay for the slave, and then the slave was going to fight in the military for his freedom. If the government bought these slaves, how should it own them? Should the slave be retained in servitude, or should his emancipation be held out to him as a reward for faithful service, or should it be granted at once on the promise of such service? By the way, the British did the same thing in the Revolutionary War. When they got a slave, they would let him fight in the British Army for his freedom. The president favored what he described as the middle ground, the policy of engaging to liberate the Negro on his discharge after faithful service, when it seems to be preferable to that granted immediate manumission or that of retaining him in servitude. So he wanted him to serve and then be freed. Davis asked, therefore, the Congress authorize the government to purchase 40,000 slaves under the terms he outlined. In effect, he was requesting not only a military workforce, but also permission to embark upon a program of compensated emancipation. For the moment, the president shrank from asking for authorization to employ blacks as soldiers, but he did not rule out that possibility. So far, they were using his military capacity, but as not as soldiers. Until a white population shall provide insufficient for the armies who require and can afford to keep on the field to employ as a soldier, the Negro would scarcely be deemed wise or advantageous. So they had failed in getting enough blacks in order to deal with the field constructions, and this they say, okay, if you come to the front lines and work on these field constructions, we'll be free. But they won't ready to arm them yet. But should the alternative be presented of subjugation or the employment of the slave as soldier, there seems no reason to doubt that what should then be our decision. However practical and expedient Davis' suggestion sounded, they threatened to undermine the remaining remnant of the antebellum Southern ideology. Slavery was part of the ideology, people. That's what these guys keep denying. It's part of the ideology. Already the Confederate experience had compelled Southerners to compromise to discard much of their cherished way of life. Now the president answers for a sizable chip of what many Southerners regarded as the cornerstone of their natural culture. Slavery. This is all about the war. They were fighting the war for slavery. Now they had chuck it because now the issue became, well, if we don't chuck slavery, and you use the blacks as soldiers, or at least in the non-combatant role, we'll fight for national survival. That's how they were looking at it. Davis wanted Confederate Southerners to compromise and perhaps eventually sacrifice the peculiar institution for the sake of national survival. And he talks about Davis requested Congress was not exactly a trial of balloons dispatched to test the sentiment of the country. Already an issue of arming and emancipating Southern slaves had received considerable publicity. Let's see. In September 1864, northern newspapers had published a captured letter from Louisiana Governor Henry W. Allen, in which Allen stated, "This time has come for us to put into the army every able-bodied Negro man as a soldier." A month later, the powerful Richmond Enquirer called in strident terms for the use of black troops. We believe the editor explained that the Negroes identified us by interest in fighting for their freedom here would be faithful and reliable soldiers. In the days which followed, the Lynchburg, Virginia, and Mobile Register endorsed the Enquirer's proposal. That same month, governors of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi met in Augusta and adopted a resolution calling for a change of policy regarding the use of slaves in the public service. These indications of public opinion, some negative response, most notably from the Charleston Mercury and William W. Holden's North Carolina stand, served as prologue to Davis' action when Congress convened. And he goes down here at the bottom of the page. If black men could be soldiers in the South, then they could never again be considered less than men. They could never again be slaves. That was the ultimate issue. That was going to end up. Wait, what happened here? The war had become to the point where they had gone to the war to fight for Negro secession, the right to expand slavery, And now they had to recognize the Negro as a person and as a man fighting for his own freedom. You couldn't view him as solely property anymore. So the whole argument that they were inferior was going to fall away. It was going to be destroyed. So that's the irony of it. The war lasted long enough for both sides to recognize slavery at an end. That's what Lincoln was pointing out in the Second Inaugural. The war had lasted so long and was so bloody that both sides had to come to the point to say slavery is no longer tenable. And that's what basically the war led to after 4 year bloody years. If black soldiers, let's see. At base, the debate over arming the slaves was a debate over the South's entire racial attitude. That was a racial attitude, people. I put the link to the Cornerstone speech by Stevens. The whole idea was they had to reject the Declaration of Independence, that all men were created equal. That's what they said, that the new nation, the Confederacy, was going to be built on the new cornerstone, that the Declaration of Independence was wrong, that all men aren't created equal, that the Negro should be under subservience under the white man. And that's why they had constantly references to slavery. But when it came down with the national survival, which is basically the same thing in the North, the blood had become so bloody that and the draft was so unpopular, they brought in black soldiers. And both sides began to see the black in a new light. Both sides began to see the Southerner, by recognizing the need for the black soldier and bringing him in there, had to recognize we can't treat him as property anymore. And the Northern bringing him in, seeing how he fought, we couldn't treat him as an unequal. Couldn't treat him anymore like that, which they initially did. That's history. That's what about this? What about that? What about that? Idiots. But these guys, what they do is they pick out a little thing here, a little here, and they show a black guy with a Confederate flag, and they show that. But basically, that destroys the whole argument against interracial marriage that Breaker has. He talks about maintaining his heritage. Well, there's the black people who are upholding the Confederate heritage. So where's your argument against interracial marriage now? See? Go to this thing on the article, about interracial marriage. Those things about we gotta maintain our heritage. Well, there were black people who upheld the same heritage, who saw themselves as Virginians, Alabamians, and Mississippians. So that's the heritage. So why can't they marry a white woman? Safe white woman, safe black man marry. That's the heritage. Oh no. Because they're phonies. A bunch of phonies. I'm going to stop and put this up. Amen. Thank you.